Hello, welcome to Women in the Weeds. I'm Diane Keach. WEEDS stands for walking through the Word of God together, eating naturally, exercising regularly, drinking water, and sleeping well. These are the foundations of wellness. And this month, I'm really focusing on getting us in the Word of God, having a habit of reading the Bible. I hope you've been reading along every day, even for 5 minutes. I love these scriptures. I feed on them all day. I think about what God is doing and who He is and what He says throughout these scriptures, and it is really food for my soul. And the foundation of wellness, first and foremost, is knowing God, recognizing Jesus, seeing who He is when He comes to you. And so today we're going to talk about a very famous story. We're going to it's a famous story, but I'm going to focus on something other than the famous part. The famous part is Jesus walking on the water and Peter going out to him and starting to sink. And Jesus says, "Oh, ye of little faith." And he touches Peter and he is also walking on the water. That's the famous part. But today we're just going to talk about the boat and the storm and the waves. You can find this in Matthew 14. Okay, so let's get to it. Jesus tells his disciples, "I'm going up to the mountain to pray. I want you to get in this boat and you go across the sea." Jesus told them, "Get in the boat and go across the sea." While Jesus is praying in the hills, the disciples are going across the sea, and a huge storm ensues. The winds have come, the rain has come, the waves are high. They're being tossed in a storm, and they're very nervous and terrified. This particular lake is known for rapid storms that erupt. You could have swells of up to 10 feet. And it's pretty terrifying to be in the middle of the water in a relatively small boat with big waves coming over the sides. But what they see coming toward them is more terrifying than the winds and the waves. They see an apparition, something coming toward them. They thought it might be a spirit. They didn't recognize who this was. It was utterly terrifying to them, more terrifying than the winds and the waves and the rain being tossed and fro and feeling like they would die. This specter before them was even more terrifying. But as Jesus draws near and comes to them, he says, "Be of good cheer, it is I. Take heart, be encouraged. Do not fear, rejoice, for I am here. I am coming to you. I am getting in your boat. I am here." And when Jesus gets in the boat, there's peace. Reminds me of the other story we were reading today in Genesis. It's the story of Joseph. Have you heard of the story of Joseph? One of my favorite stories ever. I think about Joseph often. The story of Joseph is he is one of Jacob's 12 sons. Jacob, who is also Israel, he is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. Joseph was Israel's favorite son. He loved Israel. Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons. And because of that, his older brothers, his 10 older brothers, were very jealous and angry. So they decided they would kill Joseph. And when they were determining what to do with him, one of his elder brothers says, "Well, let's not kill him, let's sell him." So they sold him to Egypt. And Joseph finds himself a slave for many years in Egypt. And while he was a slave, he was wrongfully accused of molesting the master's wife and thrown into prison, where he was there for several more years. So here's Joseph, quite a tumultuous life. He did nothing wrong and ends up as a slave, does nothing wrong and ends up in prison. How depressing. Years in prison, waiting for God, not understanding for a while, probably, what's going on. And then something miraculous happens. The Pharaoh has a dream and he doesn't understand it. And someone says, I know a man who knows about dreams. He can interpret it for you. And he calls Joseph out of prison. And Joseph was able to tell him what his dream meant. He said, "Oh, Pharaoh, you are going to have bumper crops for 7 years, and then you're going to have famine for 7 years. So you need to store up your food and get ready because a famine is coming." So Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of his entire country. And this famine went across the world, the known world, and even in Israel. It even reached Israel to Jacob and his sons. And they said, "Dad, we will starve unless you send us to Egypt to get food." So off they went. It's a long story. I'm really abbreviating it. I hope you read it because it's so interesting. But what happens is they come and they bow before Joseph. They find out that he is the Pharaoh's right-hand man. And what does Joseph say to them? He says, "Do not fear. What you meant for evil, God meant for good." Jesus got in his boat. Jesus came to Joseph and got in his boat in the tumultuous sea, in the wind-tossed vessel of his life, drowning under waves and fear, not knowing the circumstances, not knowing what was going to happen to him, was way more fearful than the actual circumstances that he found himself in, until he recognized Jesus, until he recognized that God meant it for good. You see, God means for all difficult things in your life to turn out for good. All things will work out for good for those who are called to his purpose. That's you tonight. When you're in that boat and the winds and the wave are coming, you're helpless. You can't stop the wind. You can't stop the wave. You can't keep the boat from rocking back and forth and retching up your dinner. You can't stop any of that. You have no power. You have no control. It's Jesus who comes across the water. Recognize him. He gets in your boat and he gives you peace. And then they worshiped him. They worshiped this God, this great I am, this God of the heavens who come down to earth to be close to us, to get into our boat. You see, the reason that those men were not drowned in the ocean or the sea is because Jesus was. Jesus was drowned in the sea of sorrows, in the sea of our sin. He was overwhelmed completely by the winds and the waves of our sin in this evil world, and he rose again. He takes all of our wind-tossed struggles on his own back. He carries our diseases, he carries our sorrows, he carries the chaos of our lives, and he gets in our boat and he gives us peace. May you find the peace of Jesus. May you see him coming to you. He's coming to you. He's walking through that storm. He's going to get in your boat. Worship him tonight. Give him great, great, great thanks and praise and worship, for he is a great I am, and he is near to you, and he gives you peace. Have a good night.